Good evening, listeners and viewers. It's 6:42, and it's time for the nation's business. I'm Chevon Campbell.
My name is Sanjay Lewis. So during Wednesday's post-cabinet press briefing at Jamaica House, Prime Minister Andrew Holness announced a by-election will be held for Northeast St. Anne on September 30. Nomination day will be on September 11. However, the Prime Minister would not be drawn on disclosing the dates for by-elections in two other constituencies.
Northeast St. Anne is not singled out. As I have said, we are at a stage where we are now ready to do all the by-elections, and all of them will be done. It is just that this one is going to be done first, but all the by-elections will be done.
Can you give us a time frame as to when that
As
will
they
happen?
as they come due, they will be done. And I would say within months.
Prime Minister Andrew Holness says by-elections are expected in South Trelawny and Northwest St. Andrew. On September 21 last year, Marisa Dalrymple-Philibert resigned as MP for South Trelawny following a damning report published by the Integrity Commission. The report accused her of failing to disclose the purchase of a motor vehicle in her statutory declarations for the period 2015 to 2021.
And in Northwest St. Andrew, Finance Minister Dr. Nigel Clarke is expected to vacate the seat at the end of October to take up a post at the International Monetary Fund, the IMF. Dwayne Smith is expected to be the JLP's standard bearer in that constituency. Well, joining us to discuss further, we're joined by political commentator Dr. Nadeen Spence, Assistant Lecturer of Public Policy and Political Science at UWI Mona, Damion Gordon. Good evening, and thank you, as always, for joining us.
Good evening. Thanks for having me.
Dr. Spence, are you there?
Dr. Spence?
I am here. Good evening.
Great. Let me start with you, Damion Gordon. Your reaction to the PM's announcement of a by-election in Northeast St. Anne, and also his response to that journalist about the other seats that are vacant.
All right. So this is pretty unusual, which the Prime Minister moved to announce a by-election in Northeast St. Anne, given the fact that current of the resignation of the current Member of Parliament just a few days ago. Usually some time elapses between the resignation of a Member of Parliament and the announcement of a by-election. This indicates certainly that filling this vacancy is of high priority to the Prime Minister. That has fueled some speculations as to why, this particular seat is of high interest to the Prime Minister. It could be indicative that the person who intends to represent the Jamaica Labour Party in that seat will play an important role in a new look cabinet. There's speculation that a cabinet reshuffle will be announced shortly, and Marisa Muda, who is expected to be the standard bearer for the Jamaica Labour Party in that seat, might be playing an important role in that new look cabinet. I mean, in response, in relation to the Prime Minister's response, I don't think that response is adequate, considering the fact that there has been a vacancy in the South Trelawny seat for close to a year now. So if any seat should take precedence in terms of a by-election, I'm assuming that it would have been the seat that has been without an elected representative for a prolonged period of time. And considering that we expect to have a general election next year, we may end up with a total of 5 by-elections before the end of this year. If we consider the by-election in Northeast St. Anne, the by-election in South Trelawny, and the pending by-election in Northwest St. Andrew, plus there are 2 council seats that are now vacant due to the deaths of the sitting councils, which will require by-elections as well, which means that we may end up with a total of 5 by-elections. Logistically and financially, I'm not sure if it makes sense, if it is wise at this point in time for us to have by-elections, separate by-elections. The cost, plus given the budget constraints, the fact that we just came out of a natural disaster, and I don't think that there's a mood among the electorate for, I don't think there's a strong appetite among the electorate for elections. I think that this consensus is that we should perhaps just have one election, a general election, to fill those vacancies. But again, it is clear that Prime Minister isn't the Prime Minister hopes to fast track, the election of Marisa Muda, and this to me indicates that Marisa Muda is being earmarked to play a significant role in a new look cabinet. I'm expecting a cabinet reshuffle to be announced shortly.
Dr. Nadeen, Spence, following up with you, I mean, obviously the Prime Minister, it is within his discretion when the by-elections are called, as is the date be within the constitutional framework as to when an election is called. So do you see this as some kind of abuse of the process? And do you see, as Professor Gordon pointed out there, that this could be a potential poor move considering how close we are to a general election?
The truth of it is that Dr. Clarke resigned. We got that news, was it last week? And
yes.
He's not resigned. No, to be correct, he has not resigned yet. But he has announced that he's leaving, yes.
Announced to be leaving, yeah.
Right. So clearly the government is thinking about what is in their best interest in terms of maintaining government the next time we have an election. I think that's what all governing parties do, whether they have a fixed election date or not. They seek to maintain an advantage. Perhaps what we are seeing is the government's insistence that with Nigel Clarke out, what is it going to be, the end of September, the 1st of, I don't remember the exact date. Whenever
end of October.
Their best bet is to find a position outside of the Senate for Marisa Muda. And I mean, a lot of us had expected it would have been somebody who is currently in the House of Representatives, in the lower house, who would have filled that seat. I think that this move has been made. Everybody's wondering, what does this mean? But I think it's within the Prime Minister's right to do so, constitutional right to do so. We might differ as to whether or not we think it is the most expedient move. It might turn out not to be. Who knows? It clearly is politicking, and the government of the day, the Jamaica Labour Party, seeking to ensure that it is not negatively impacted by the departure of Dr. Clarke, which we know is going to have a significant impact on the government. So clearly the government feels that it is in a position where it needs to do things differently. And so I think that this is a reaction to that. I don't think we expected it. I think everybody expected that Northeast Centre would have been contested by Matthew come the next general election. Nobody would have seen this. So I don't know. Clearly, this is the Prime Minister doing what his office allows him in our Constitution, which is to play the politics in his favor.
And just to follow up, Dr. Spence, I know there are a lot of people who, upon hearing this, have called again, as the calls have been repeated over and over, for dates for by-elections to be fixed to a period after the resignation or untimely withdrawal of a member of parliament. But would that change anything? Wouldn't the MP in question still simply just stay in the seat until their party leader has decided that it is quite within their political expedience to call such an election? And it doesn't seem that there's any appetite on either side when they're in power to actually make that adjustment for fixed elections.
I mean, that's true. I think it's a political advantage that the party in power has. When you're in opposition, you complain about that advantage, and when you're in government, you make use of it. I don't think that the change is going to necessarily come in the way we anticipated. The same kind of impatience that the rest of the public might have for that arrangement is not. One can see why. is not what the government is going to have for the situation. So I think that was the intention of the parliamentary democracy system, to give an advantage to the incumbent. And I would imagine that this would have been an arrangement arrived at by
the framers of the Constitution, yes.
A sitting government. It's a way of creating an advantage. It doesn't necessarily work that way all the time, though, because remember, we do change government. If it leads to an advantage to the point where it impacts the outcome of an election or it guarantees an incumbent government re-election, then we can say it creates an unfair advantage in a way that impacts the way we practice democracy. But in Jamaica, it hasn't done that.
But
so.
Damion Gordon, let me hear you, Damion Gordon, on the matter of the political capital that the Prime Minister may have spent on this decision, because we already seen the People's National Party putting a spin on it, indicating that the Prime Minister is playing the politics. A seat that has been vacant for almost a year has not yet been filled, but one that was vacated just a day ago, the by-election is called. Do you think that the PM may spend any political capital over this move?
Yes, because the decision to announce a by-election in North East St. Anne may be interpreted by Jamaicans as being an unprincipled position. It's one that was born out of expediency and not based on a commitment to ensure that all citizens across the country are equally represented. South Trelawny, if you were to go by the electoral data, is considered a safe JLP seat, more or less. And therefore, if the Jamaica Labour Party had called a by-election, announced a by-election for that seat at any point in time, it is likely that the Jamaica Labour Party candidate would have won. But that constituency has been without a member of parliament. Year, there has been a vacancy in a council seat in St. Thomas as well. And there has been advocacy on the part of the opposition for an election to be announced to fill that vacancy. And the Prime Minister has not heeded to that call. And that seat is currently without and has been without a representative. A councillor died in Clarendon several days ago. That seat is also, and that councillor died, and that before we heard of the resignation of Marcia Smith, and an election has not been announced for that seat. So the question is, why is it that the other constituency and division that have been that are without representation and have been without representation, why is it that they were not given the same, consideration as North East St. Anne? Why is it that North East St. Anne is being held to a different standard than the other, the South Trelawny and the council seat in St. Thomas, for example? So I think that it potential. I think a lot of it has fueled speculations where people are wondering, why is it that this seat is a priority? Is it that Marisa Muda will assume a central role in the cabinet of the Jamaica Labour Party? But in any event, the fact that it appears to be born out of expediency and not a commitment to any principle, the principle of ensuring that all voters, all constituents, all Jamaicans have access to representation. You can't have a constituency without a member of parliament for almost a year. Who represent those people? The passage of Beryl was not too long ago. Many of them have many issues related to the passage of Beryl that, the MP is expected to play a central role in making advocacy on their behalf, and they have other community challenges as well. So they have been without a standing representative in the parliament for almost a year. And for the Prime Minister to say, we're not sure about when the date for this election will be, but we move quickly to announce a by-election in North East St. Anne a couple of days after the resignation of the Member of Parliament. I think that it can potentially backfire, and it has invited, questions and concerns and speculations, and many of them are unfavorable, where people are saying, well, the Prime Minister clearly is it's a strategic move. It's something. It's born out of expediency rather than it indicating that the Prime Minister is committed to the service of all Jamaicans.
But Damion Gordon, how can it politically backfire, though, if the People's National Party has essentially said they're not contesting any of these by-elections and they'll wait till the general elections are come around?
Yeah, it may backfire if, for example, the election is held and the turnout is very low, and when the other by-elections are called, the turnout is also very low. I think that the extent that these elections may indicate a high level of disinterestedness and a high level of frustration among the Jamaican people, I think that the bigger picture, obviously, is a general election. And again, the Prime Minister has struggled in the recent polls that have released, and the recent polls have indicated a decline in the Prime Minister's favorability as well as the favorability of the government. You don't want to put yourself in a position to attract any more negative response or reaction from the voters who you intend to convince to give you a third term a year from now, by actually asking them to perhaps go to the poll 5 times this year. They've already gone through a local government election, and with a series of by-elections may be announced before the year ends. I think that when you combine those factors, I don't think that the electorate is in the mood and appetite for election at this point in time. I think people are saying, if we're going to have an election, let us do it properly and let us do it properly. There are several vacancies now that require by-elections. Why not just have a general election rather than have 5 separate elections in a year when people are recovering from, for example, burial? We already had a local government election. There are other issues that people are complaining about, and the resources will be required to manage each election, significant resources. So that is where the potential for this to backfire lies.
But I have to challenge you on that one thing, though, regarding voter turnout. Jamaica's voter turnout has not been particularly stellar over the last few years. Yeah. And on top of that, no one really expects a by-election to have a large turnout, and but especially one where the other party is just not going to contest it.
That's the point. If that will even compound the issue, because if opposition does not participate, people are going to see it, therefore, as a monumental waste of resources, because the opposition has withdrawn. It's pretty much a two-party race in any election, and if one party has withdrawn and it is only one party that is contesting the election, that further compounds, the perception that, it constitutes a monumental waste of what many Jamaicans consider to be very scarce resources that could have been directed towards other critical ends at this point in time.
I hear you want to come in, Dr. Spence, but I want to also ask you on the decision of the People's National Party not to contest any by-election, parliamentary by-election leading up to the general election. Do you believe that this is a good move, a smart move politically, not to contest any of these elections? And I also wanted to respond to what Damion was saying.
Whether or not it's a good move again. It's a lot of the conversations that we have about politics in Jamaica is so partisan that it's kind of difficult to assess, what is happening in terms of this particular situation, So what would be a middle of the ground perspective is what I'm thinking about and trying to wrap around my head. And I'm thinking that, okay, clearly this decision has been influenced by Dr. Clarke's announcement of his departure. That's one. 2, the government is seeking to not be disadvantaged by that position. So is the matter really that the government wants to bring somebody into the Senate that is going to change the ground for it? Is it that Matthew Samuda is going to represent the most likely candidate for Minister of Finance? Is it that, so many other things? To me, the issue is not really about the election, because
it's not in a Dr. Spence, but hear me on this. The optics is also, in politics, you and I know that optics is important. And understanding that you have Southern Trelawny, that for over almost a year, there's no representative. And we know Southern Trelawny is a strong JLP constituency. Why not just have the election in Southern Trelawny to not have this wasted political capital where individuals are now speaking about other constituencies that you have decided not to fill, but you decided to move forward with Northeast because we understand the situation in Matthew Smoother?
Is it that Miss Dalrymple is coming back for her seat, perhaps? No. It's politics, Remember, there are some cards that we don't know about. But perhaps we are going to see the return of Mrs. Dalrymple. And perhaps the matter that is outstanding needs to be resolved before she is ready for an election. Remember, it is the governing party that is going to call the shots, and it's going to act in its own advantage. That is not anything that is new to the political arena. What the question is, based on what we are seeing now, what could we surmise about what the government is thinking? At least that's from me. That's one. The second thing is, what about the PNPs choosing not to contest? Well, the PNP is also playing its own cards. What is it likely that is likely to happen when it runs? If it contests this election, it's going to lose. It doesn't want to go into an election period with losses around its name. It has to choose again. Is this going to give us an advantage? What are we going to likely get from this? If this is a JLP stronghold, we are going to get poor showing. Would it make sense to contest this and to have the JLP have a bragging point going into the next election? It's political. It's partisan chess game, and people are looking for what will suit them politically. So for me, there is the argument of what perhaps Damion is arguing is that on the face of it, this doesn't look good. These are some of the things that we have to consider. But the truth of it is, when political parties are thinking through what it is that is going to drive their decisions, they're thinking about what is going to give them the political advantage.
So Dr. Spence, just as plainly as you put it, this is not some principled position you believe the People's National Party is taking. You just believe this is a strategic move on their part to essentially avoid what is going to be a blowout contest.
Yeah. I mean, I think all of us in this country know that. It's a JLP stronghold. Shatini Robinson made it a JLP stronghold. I think if the PNP suspected that this might be one of those constituencies where the tide has turned in their favor, they would, of course, have contested. But clearly, this is not the situation.
Damion, let me hear you on that. That's a good point raised by Dr. Spence. If the PNP had recognized that maybe it's a seat that they could win, maybe they would contest.
The reality is that when it comes down to elections, the government that has access to state resources, the ruling party, has an advantage in terms of being able to mobilize resources to campaign extensively for a by-election. Obviously, being in a position, you have to think more carefully about your resource capabilities. And I suspect that the limited resources that the opposition currently has at its disposal are being reserved for the general election. I'm not sure if it will be prudent on opposition now to expend resources to campaign in, several by-elections when a general election is due in less than a year. Realistically, in some of the seats, for example, at South Trelawny, I don't think that the opposition People's National Party has won that seat in decades, if ever. So at the Northeast and as Nadeen, Dr. Spence rightfully pointed out, has become more or less a JLP stronghold recently. I think that when the People's National Party projects the seats it expects to win in the next general election, I am quite sure that neither of these seats is counted among those that expect to take them back to state power. So I think that in that sense, it is strategic because the PNP may not see it themselves as having anything to lose from abstaining from the by-election. And rightfully, as Nadeen pointed out, if the PNP felt that it has a strong chance of is viable or would be viable in either of these two seats, maybe they will show a keener interest. But again, the position can also come across as a principled position from the perspective of them saying you have to treat all the seats in the same way. You have to apply the same principle and the same standard across the board. And if you don't, we will not participate in the process. So that extent, the position of the People's National Party may be seen as principled, because you have other prior vacancies that have not been filled, and you are most suited to fill a vacancy. Obviously, it's not the same standard across the board, and to that extent, the position of the People's National Party can come across as principled, even though it can come across as strategic. So I think that to this extent, this puts the PNP in a favorable light, because in any event, the position of the PNP they can claim that the position is principled. But at the same time, we can also speculate that it may be strategic, but we can't dismiss the principle behind the position, and it is one that resonates.
Mm-hmm. We have to leave it there. Thank you, as always, Assistant Lecturer of Public Policy and Political Science at UW-Mona, Damion Gordon, and political commentator Dr. Nadeen Spence. Thank you for your time.